Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Living Yoga Satsang talk, Reflections on Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's begin together with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Bless us this day as we dive into these teachings. Help us to receive the blessings that are offered here, to apply these blessings to our journey, and to be a channel of thy divine light to all. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, so we begin, the next chapter. So we finished last week, chapter 22, the heart of a stone image, and then we move into chapter 23. But at the very end of chapter 22, there was a point I didn't get to. So I want to start with that today, and then we'll move into 23. So at the end of the chapter, Yogananda said that he had the thought that his brother-in-law, so the last chapter was about his sister Roma and her husband, and it's a beautiful chapter about her petition to Yogananda to help her husband spiritually, which he's able to do. And then Yogananda said he had the thought after this experience that his brother-in-law didn't have long to live. And his sister, he said, must have caught that thought and then said to him, "Dear brother," she said, "I am well and my husband is sick. Nevertheless, I want you to know that as a devoted Hindu wife, I am going to be the first one to die. It won't be long now before I pass on." And Yogananda said he was startled by those words, but he could feel the sting of truth in them. He recognized it's true. So then later, his own brother told him the story. His sister did, in fact, die first. And his brother Vishnu later told him the story. And he said that Roma got up in the morning and she put on her bridal finery. So the clothing that she had worn, I guess some of the clothing that she had worn when she got married. And her husband said to her, why are you dressed this way? And she said to him, "This is my last day of service to you on earth." And Yogananda goes on to say, Roma, a short time later, she had a heart attack. As her son was rushing out for aid, she said to her son, "Do not leave me. It is of no use. I shall be gone before a doctor could arrive." 10 minutes later, holding the feet of her husband in reverence, Roma consciously left her body, happily and without suffering. It was very extraordinary. Story that she had that consciousness, she had that awareness, she had a great sense of peace in her own passing and in the rightness of her passing. It reminds me a little bit of Yogananda's mother's passing, that when she said to her son, there was a message that she left for him because she wasn't able to be with him in person. So there's a whole story quite early on in Autobiography of a Yogi about that experience, but she left a note for Yogananda that said, actually, she did leave a note for him, but what I'm remembering that she tells in the note is a saint had come to her to let her know she didn't have long to live. And she felt the truth of it and a profound peace about it, which as a mother with a young child, it's extraordinary to have that kind of peace in leaving. And I think death at any time, it's extraordinary to have peace about it. And then when you have obvious responsibilities, to feel a sense that it's okay. It's okay. It's your time and it's all right and your work is done, which is very much in line with the teachings of yoga, that each soul, each of us as a divine soul, has a specific length of time here in this incarnation. And this incarnation will end when we are, there's a few ways of looking at it from the yoga perspective. Ultimately, it ends when we have gone as far as we can in this particular incarnation with our consciousness. So that's why it's considered a blessing and a moment of expansion and freedom, because we're complete in this life. It doesn't mean that we've attained self-realization yet. We might attain final liberation in this life. But if we haven't, when the body dies, the physical body dies, the soul is ready for that death. And it's perfect timing for our soul nature, which is a very different way of looking at death than how we hold it in general, certainly in the Western culture. Death is so often perceived in situations where you have a young mother with a young child. It would naturally be considered a tragedy. There's no question that it can be very heartbreaking. It would be very heartbreaking. And Yogananda speaks openly and directly about his heartbreak as a child. It was devastating for him to lose his mother. So when he receives a note from her later, from his brother Ananta, because Ananta, his oldest brother, was there when she died, she told him, give this to Yogananda, because the saint who came to his mother had a talisman for him, an amulet to give him that would bring him grace and bring him support, which it did. Another way of saying this death, the timing of this death is right timing. So here we have Roma, who knows spiritually. She's given that knowledge and that awareness that she's going to die on the very day of her death. It's remarkable. And there are many stories. I've heard many different stories about individuals who had that clarity, who had that knowing. And it's nevertheless remarkable any time that I hear it, that someone could just know. They could know within themselves, it's my time now. Animals too. So there's a sense of rightness. And so he's talking about that. Then the story goes on, which is also extraordinary, about his brother-in-law. So let's go down a little bit. Her husband, Yogananda's brother-in-law, became very reclusive after his wife's death. And Bishnu, Yogananda's brother, said that one day he and I were looking at a large smiling photograph of Roma. And the husband was smiling. And Bishnu is almost what Bishnu said, as if his wife was present. And then he began speaking to the picture. And suddenly he said, you think you were clever, so he's talking to the picture, in arranging to go before me, but I shall prove that you cannot long remain away from me. Soon I will join you. And I think this was about 6 months after his wife had passed. Although at this time Satish, the husband, had fully recovered from his sickness and was enjoying excellent health, he died without apparent cause, shortly after his strange remark before the photograph. And Yogananda said, thus prophetically passed my dearly beloved eldest sister Roma and her husband Satish. So amazing, right, that both of these souls, who for no apparent reason in terms of their health, left their bodies. And to me, whenever I'm going through the Autobiography of a Yogi, part of what I'm listening for are the yogic teachings within each chapter and what Yogananda makes a point of talking about. So, he tells the story of his life, and he includes many different stories. And so I often sit with the question, why did he include that one? What about that story highlights yogic teaching? How might it be helpful for me or for others? And certainly, I think death is one of the greatest mysteries of physical incarnation, and can be one of the most challenging experiences in our physical incarnation. the death of a loved one, the death of ourself, the timing of death. There's so much mystery, feeling, seeming. Well, there is a lot of mystery around it, but what can, quite often, it's been my experience that the timing can seem wrong. And so the yogic teachings tell us that it's not wrong. And in fact, when it's the right time, even when there's no apparent reason, it will happen. And this is not unique to yoga. It's not limited to yoga. There's a beautiful psalm, and I believe it's Psalm 139. It's either 139 or 131. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a quote in that psalm that says, thine eyes, speaking to God, thine eyes have seen my actions. In your book, they are all written. My days were limited before one of them existed. How weighty are your designs, O God, how vast the sum of them. Were I to recount them, they would outnumber the sands. Did I reach the end of them, I should still be with you. It's a beautiful psalm. And this idea, my days were limited before one of them existed. So this teaching, this idea that we have a certain length of time within our incarnation to be here. And it's meaningful. So in yoga teaching, the physical body, Yogananda said that the nervous system within the physical body is so refined that we have the capacity as human beings to realize God. So it's one of the great blessings to be in a physical form as a human being. It's a great blessing. And of all manifestation, physical manifestation, it's considered the highest manifestation because we have the capacity to realize our own divine self. All of life is sacred. So it doesn't mean that a human being is more sacred than any other life. Not that. But it is unique and special and should be guarded very, very carefully, right? To have a sense of reverence for all life and specific reverence for the physical form that we have. Right? To be attentive to respecting the incarnation, this incarnation. There's a story, Happy Winningham, I believe it was Happy, so a student of Swami Kriyananda's, and I think this was Happy, but she asked, she had AIDS actually, Happy had AIDS, and she was near death many times. Extraordinary woman, I never knew her, but all the stories about her are so inspiring. And at a certain point, she asked Swami Kriyananda, should I be trying to stay alive? It seems like the body might be ready to go. Should I be fighting this? And Swami reminded her, and that's why this story is retold, that it's very, very valuable to be in a physical body. And if you can maintain that body, you should. Especially when you have come to a spiritual path, when you realize the goal of life is self-realization. Whatever spiritual path you follow, once you're dedicated to the truth, to awakening and realizing your highest self, it's a very good thing to stay alive in the physical body as long as you can to further that. But when it gets to a point where you're in your body and you can't do that anymore, you're not able to grow spiritually, consciously, for a number of reasons, but we could certainly say with physical illness, it can be very hard, definitely. Right? So he said at a certain point, when you're not able to consciously practice your spiritual practices, then it's okay to basically to relax and let go. It's obviously with every decision like this, it takes deep discernment to know, and it's very helpful to have teachers to guide us. Asha tells a story of another woman who had cancer, and similar kind of thing. She was saying to Swamiji, this is interesting how it can happen. Basically a similar question, should I keep fighting to stay alive? She'd been through a round, she had recovered, it had returned, she had children, a family. It was hard for her to imagine letting them go, but something in her, right, caused her to not just automatically try to garner all her strength to stay alive physically. Something in her seems like was sensing, maybe not, maybe this isn't, maybe not fight to stay alive in her body. And Swamiji said, focus on the light. Don't try to decide, should I fight to stay alive or let go and let this be my time of death? Don't try to come to an answer with that. Instead, focus on the light, and what's right for you will happen. So if you're meant to stay alive, he wasn't saying stop treatment. He wasn't saying anything like that. He was saying focus on the light. You'll be guided, and it's the right thing to do no matter what. So powerful, so beautiful. These different ways of navigating something profoundly challenging. There's a story in the Mahabharata, famous line, it's often quoted, of Yudhishthira, who's the leading Pandava. He's known for Dharma. That is his power, you could say. His great power is that he follows Dharma, and he is the exemplary model of living dharmically. And there's a scene in the Mahabharata where there's a lake that asks questions when you come to take a drink. And each person before him is asked a question and is not able to answer it. And the lake, if you don't answer correctly, is poisonous. It's interesting, the Mahabharata, it's allegorical, very symbolic. So the famous quote experience with Yudhishthira, as he comes to take a drink, the lake says to him, asks him several questions, but the most famous is, what do you consider the most bewildering aspect of being alive? What have you found to be the most bewildering? These aren't the exact words, but this is the essence of the question. And Yudhishthira pauses and says that everyone dies, but at the same time, we all know that, we all see that everyone leaves their physical body, that the physical body has a limited length of time on earth. But somehow everyone thinks it won't happen to them. They observe it, but they think it won't happen to them. And this is often quoted because of the way that we don't live in this consciousness in an uplifted way. I want to add that the physical body has limited time. In yoga teachings, it's not a tragedy. It's just not a tragedy. And so I will say for myself, I find it to be something I work with. Right? I just not every day. I'm not thinking about it every day. But when I come across it, or when death comes into my life, which has happened recently. A dear friend passed this summer, and a beloved kitty, our beloved kitty, Surya, very recently passed away. So death has really been in my life the last few months, and working with this mystery of releasing a soul to take its next step in its journey, and to trust in the freedom for that soul, and to trust that it went as long in this incarnation as it was meant to go. Something that Yogananda said about pets, and I love that he talked about it, right? Because he said these things that speaking to all of us to help us. So he said that animals that are in human households, especially a loving household, they're very close to becoming a human being. Right? It could be their next incarnation, they'll be a human being. If not the next one, very close. And when they're with human beings, because for any of you who have a beloved pet, we tend to talk to them like they are human. Right? We ask them questions. We relate to them in that way when it's a part of the family. Many people have pets in that way. And I love that Yogananda said it's very good for the animal. It's good for the humans too. I can certainly attest to that. But it's good for the animal. They're learning how to be a human being. They're learning what that consciousness is like, and it makes the transition easier for them. So a dear friend of mine, just before Surya passed, he said to me, he said, the next few babies that are born, I'm going to look in their eyes for Surya. Just so sweet. Surya was very much a community kitty, and I love that about him, there are many who loved him and supported him and appreciated him, and he connected very sweetly, very individually with each person. Same with Uma, who passed this summer, who loved Surya. She loved him, and she played a part in our adopting Surya, so it's very sweet. So, but for those of us, left behind, it's not easy. It's not easy to trust the timing is divinely perfect. And there's a beautiful ceremony called the Astral Ascension Ceremony. If you're not familiar with it, you can find it through Ananda. If you search Astral Ascension Ceremony, you can find it, it'll come up, and anyone's welcome to read that. A minister actually can also read it for a loved one of yours if you like. It could be comforting for someone getting ready to exit. And also once someone has exited, it's a beautiful way of holding for that soul. It's a blessing for the soul to continue. And for those who are still here in physical form, it helps them to release the soul. So all of that I just felt inspired to touch upon that. It's an extraordinary story about conscious death, conscious exiting, actually knowing with clarity within the self that my time has come. And in that understanding, a place of peace and acceptance and freedom. I have also witnessed that many times. Death has been around me, so being with others in their transition or close to the transition, when you get to that point of acceptance, it's profound to be around. The other thing I'll say is the abundance of grace that I've noticed that feels very palpable and tangible to help everyone, to help the soul that's leaving and to help the souls that are staying. There's an abundance of grace that we can draw upon. And I've watched this happen in my own life, and I've watched it in others. For those who are very close to the one who left, and the same with birth. That Asha recently was saying that the divine timing of incarnating into a physical body and departing a physical body, it's exact in astrologically, birth and death, exact timing. So the planets, everything line up exactly. There's a perfection in it. And I've seen in both birth and death, and birth tends to be more naturally joyous, but an abundance of grace to support that. There are big moments, physical birth and physical death. Okay, so we'll just get started. I don't know, we'll never see how far we go in any particular chapter. But moving into chapter 23, the title of the chapter is I Received My University Degree. It is the highlight, the emphasis of this particular story is it begins with Yogananda's professor, one of his professors, being very stern with him and saying, you are not going to pass my exam that's coming up. And the professor, makes this declaration. So it starts with, because Yogananda was always at the ashram, he did not spend very much time at school at all. He says in the chapter that there was more attention was given when he happened to be there because he so rarely was there. And most of his professors appreciated his spiritual life, and they never thought he would be able to pass what's called the A-B exams, these very stringent, difficult exams. So you go through a level of schooling, and then you have to take these college exams. So he said his professors, they just basically, they let him get through. They weren't all that concerned about it. He had to do his tests, but they just thought, oh, there's no harm. And, and actually he had the nickname Mad Monk. They considered him drunk with spirituality. But this particular professor was not lenient at all and said to him, to Yogananda, you ignore your textbook assignments in philosophy. No doubt you are depending upon unlaborious intuition to get you through the examinations. But unless you apply yourself in a more scholarly manner, I shall see to it that you don't pass this course. So he's really letting him know he's not pleased with him, and he's going to hold him accountable. So Yogananda said that he talked to Sri Yukteswar. Let me back up a little bit here because there's kind of two pieces to it. And he did say, let me see right here. So my instructors, okay. He wasn't as concerned. Now he figured that he could get through the test, But he didn't think he could do the AB exam. So he's kind of distinguishing between the two things. So he felt confident that he would be able to pass the written test. He felt that it's true, he hadn't been doing the textbooks, but he felt he could prepare and get through it. But he also felt that this professor had singled him out in such a way that he literally wouldn't pass him, even if Yogananda answered the questions correctly. So the first thing that happens in the chapter is that Yogananda takes the test, and then after the test is completed, he asks his friend to come with him to go visit the professor. And he said to his friend, "I would like a witness." So his friend goes with him. He goes to the professor's office. The professor looks at him and says, "You didn't pass, right? You didn't pass." And Yogananda said, and then he said, he said, "You didn't pass, I'll get you your paper if you'd like." Because he said, "Could I see my paper?" So he looks through the papers, he doesn't see Yogananda's name. He said, "Well, your paper's not even here, so you definitely didn't pass. But even if you'd come, you wouldn't have passed." And Yogananda said, "Could I look at the pile of papers?" "Sure, go ahead." Well, what he had done, he didn't put his name on his paper because he knew his professor would fail him. So he wrote his roll call number, which does identify him because each student has a specific number. And the teacher didn't catch it. He didn't notice that it was a roll call number and not a name. And when Yogananda found his paper, he had gotten very high marks on it. Well, his professor was livid with that. And, "Okay, you've tricked me, but you'll never pass the AB exams." Well, Yogananda didn't think he would. He thought, sure, I just needed to get through this. Well, then Sri Yukteswar says to him, "The exams are coming up in a few days. I hope you're prepared," which was very shocking for Yogananda because he said, "Well, I've spent all my time here." And he talks about basically his days, 9:30 in the morning, he would arrive at the ashram with flowers for his guru. Sri Yukteswar would invite him to lunch. They'd spend the whole day together. Around midnight, he'd go home. And he said that sometimes he even stayed the whole night. He wouldn't leave. So he was saying back to his guru, "Well, I can't possibly pass those exams. I could do the other ones, but I can't pass that." But Sri Yukteswar said, "No, it's important that you pass those exams. So you need to take those tests." And what he said is, "I'm asking you to show up and take them, you'll pass." Okay, so I like that. It's sweet to me when Yogananda is emotional because he's human, right? So he said he's sobbing and, "Okay, I'll do it." He doesn't see how it's possibly going to happen. And Sri Yukteswar said, "Reach out to this particular student, he'll help you." And this student apparently was very, very busy. Yogananda thought, "Oh, he'll never be able to help me. Just reach out to him." So he does. And the student miraculously has time and devotes hours to helping him and guides him very specifically in the kinds of questions that he's likely to see. Some of his classmates overhear the tutoring and they begin to say, "Oh, he's guiding you wrongly here. This isn't going to work. He's wrong in his guidance." Yogananda ignores that. He follows the tutor, and miraculously, he passes those exams. He gets exactly the answers that, the questions that he was tutored in, and is able to answer them. He's as much in a state of awe about it as all the students around him. It becomes, widespread, this miraculous story of everyone. How did the mad monk pass these exams? How is it possible he would be tutored in exactly the way that he needed to be tutored? And we were all wrong about that. So it's a experience also of grace for the other students. And there are previous stories in Autobiography where you see that. You see that others, not only does a miracle happen, but others are privy to that miracle. That they're able to recognize, oh, wow, something beyond a regular conscious mind understanding is at work here. So this happens, and it ends sweetly with Yogananda, just bowing at his guru's feet with gratitude and deep appreciation that this could happen. And Sri Yukteswar says to him, another famous quote, that he said, it is more possible for the sun and moon to interchange their positions in space than it is for you to fail in getting your degree. So this idea that when something is right, when it is meant to be, It will happen. It will happen. And if we align ourselves with the grace that supports us, that's always available to us, miraculous things unfold. There's a beautiful book Asha wrote, a collection of stories. It's called Cared For and Protected. I was reminded of when I was reading this chapter, that I recommend to you. And it's filled with stories like this, where the impossible is possible. So here it is, Yoganandas, reminding us of the power of grace, the power of the soul's right journey, and when we follow it, doors open that should be closed. Things move out of the way that we can't understand why, but they do, and they can. So I offer that for you today, just as you move through the week, living in this place of possibility and turning and tuning in with the divine grace of perfect timing in your own journey. How are things unfolding perfectly, and how can you stay in that flow of energy that feels perfect for you? That's one of my prayers that I will offer for asking for grace when things seem wrong. Help me to see how everything is right. Help me to see it, help me to feel it, help me to know it. And quite often I do receive that. I receive that I can find the peace, find the acceptance, which then allows me to move through whatever's happening with greater ease, with greater freedom. So good to be with you, great souls. Wishing you a beautiful day.